Now, from CBS News Miami, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Welcome to Facing South Florida. I'm Jim DeFede. We are on for an hour today because we have a lot to cover with the election just 16 days away. Across Florida, mail-in ballots are already being cast, and early voting gets underway on Monday. Today, though, we are going to focus most of our attention on Amendment 4, and in a few minutes, we are going to premiere a new short documentary I produced about a young woman here in Florida who was forced to leave the state to get an abortion because of the 6-week ban currently in effect. We are also going to hear from Dr. Grazie Christie, a leading critic of Amendment 4, and has been featured prominently in television ads across the state urging people to vote no. But before we get to that, this week CBS Miami hosted a pair of primetime debates, the first featuring the candidates for Miami-Dade Sheriff and the second on Amendment 3, which would legalize marijuana for anyone 21 years of age or older. Here is a clip from the sheriff's debate between Democrat James Reyes and Republican Rosie Cordero-Stutz. You're asking to lead a department with roughly 3,200 sworn police officers, and yet you've never done that job. You know, you don't know what it's like to pull a car over on a dark street without backup. You don't know what it's like to walk up to a door for a domestic violence case and what's on the other side, or investigate a homicide. So my question to you is twofold. How can you gain the trust and respect of the men and women of the Miami-Dade Police Department if you've never been a cop? And why should voters vote for someone who's never been a cop?
Sure. So thank you very much for hosting us, Jim. First and foremost, what's important for me is to remind everyone, and it's something that resonated during our campaign, reminding them that I'm not running to be a police officer. I'm not running to be a chief of police or a director. I have a director that currently reports to me, and she's doing a good job. I'm running to be sheriff of Miami-Dade County. And as a candidate for sheriff, I'm uniquely qualified for this position, being that I am the only candidate in this race, and have been, that has executive leadership experience leading a sheriff's office, that I've led over 5,600 employees, which included law enforcement officers. So I have done that. I've led sworn officers in corrections as well, and in fire rescue. I've managed a $1.2 billion budget, all integral parts of the differences that come to this county once we elect a sheriff. I'm also, when you talk about how can I gain the respect of the men and women, I have the respect of the men and women in the department. I actually have the endorsement of the Police Benevolent Association.
It's important to be able to understand what it is that you risk every day as a police officer. When you put on that uniform, when you get in a car to respond to a 911 call, when you come up the ranks, dedicating yourself to take examinations, to be able to get promoted, to understand what it is, what it takes to lead the troops into battle, because it is sometimes a battle, as we all know. There's plans of actions that we have to prepare. You have to understand the relationships that are built with our community, on the streets, with the leaders, with actual criminals when you're not arresting them. And these are all things that we have to build up. You have to understand what it takes to be on a scene like a Surfside. You need to understand what it's like to respond to a hurricane activation. These are all things that you gather over 28 years of experience like I have had. So yes, I do believe that you need to be a police officer to be a sheriff.
One of the ways that you distinguish yourself to try to win the Republican nomination was to gain the endorsement of Donald Trump. You know, given what happened on January 6th, where 140 police officers were assaulted and injured, Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick died just hours after the assault because of issues that he faced during the uprising. You know, 4 Capitol Police officers have committed suicide in the aftermath of it. I do want to ask you, do you believe Donald Trump bears any responsibility for what happened to those officers? And did the events of January 6th give you any pause at all about seeking Donald Trump's endorsement for this job?
Well, the events of January 6th are clearly very troublesome. Really was a very dark day in the history of America. But the truth of the matter is that there were people there that were breaking the law, that were criminals, that committed criminal acts and needed to be arrested and charged for their acts. And there were people there who went there with their intent to express their freedom of speech. And I do believe that, unfortunately, that day there was a very bad clash of both of those incidents. But in regards to my endorsement of President Trump, he endorsed me, and I respectfully am very proud of that endorsement.
What I'm troubled by is her questioning our justice system. What I'm troubled by is posts that she's made where our sheriff of this county is going to be a law enforcement leader within our county. And it is imperative that we talk to the credibility of our justice system. And Ms. Stutz in post have questioned that credibility of the justice system, the same justice systems that as sheriff we're going to be serving. So for me, that is disturbing. And it's also disturbing when she's made several things partisan, like the budget, for example, but in addition to the budget, also talking about not being able to allow our counties to turn blue. And unfortunately, she's here to serve everyone in this community, regardless of party, because I am focused on being the candidate that brings us together as a community, not separates us further.
And here now is a clip from the debate on legalizing marijuana between State Senator Joe Gruters, who supports Amendment 3, and Dr. Jessica Spencer, who opposes it.
My biggest concern is the fact that it is a constitutional amendment. We can't legislate our way out of the issues and the problems that we see. It is absolutely corporate greed. It is not for personal and just for individuals. This is corporate greed.
Let me bring Joe. And Joe, I want to hear your arguments for it, but I do, to her point, there are currently, well, I checked, 883,000 medical marijuana patients. There's roughly 650 licensed dispensaries for medical marijuana. It seems that if someone wants to find a way to get medical marijuana, they can. Why do we need to broaden it to make it for recreational marijuana as well?
Well, you just hit the point that I was going to make. We have 850,000 people, almost a million people that use the medical marijuana license card right now. There's another almost 2 million people that use marijuana through illicit markets, and that's the problem. That's what this debate's all about. It's about safety. It's about making sure that people could have access to a safe product. And the more, if we pass this, it's safety, it's decriminalization. 16,000 people were arrested last year here in the state of Florida on minor possession of marijuana. It's long overdue that we get rid of that. And ultimately, as the legislature, we will control the time, place, and manner that this passes. And so for me, but ultimately, it's about if you believe at home that if you know somebody that uses marijuana, and then if you know somebody that uses marijuana outside of the medical dispensaries, they can get arrested, and they may be taking a substance, a product that has laced with fentanyl or some other drug, and people are dying.
So Jessica, let's touch on that point.
Sure.
Isn't it better for people to be able to buy marijuana from a licensed dispensary that they may know where it came from, rather than buy it from a friend of a friend who has a guy who sells some dope?
You would certainly think so, but unfortunately in the states that have recreational marijuana, we do not see the black market going away. We actually see it flourishing, because people are going to seek out the less expensive option. You cannot make marijuana more safe.
Go ahead. And just to point that, Colorado, where they passed it, and it's talked about a lot, 99% of the product that's purchased is through the regulated legal market.
I don't know where Joe is getting the 99% from, because if you look at the Rocky Mountain HIDTA report, people are getting quite a bit of marijuana from the black market. I can imagine that's not being reported.
Well, you can find the full debates on the sheriff's race and Amendment 3 at cbsmiami.com. Which brings us to Amendment 4, which would restore a woman's right to have an abortion up until viability, which medically is considered around 24 weeks. According to its supporters, it would return Florida to where we were before the Supreme Court struck down Roe. To pass, the amendment requires 60% approval. 10 states have abortion measures on their ballots this year, but only Florida requires a 60% threshold. So as you can see, the supporters already have a high bar to reach, and they're not complaining about that. But what they are upset about is how the governor, in their opinion, is abusing his power to try and defeat the amendment. Let me give you an example. He sent his recently created election police force to the homes of people who signed the Amendment 4 petition, questioning if they actually did sign it. Now, just to be clear, supporters of Amendment 4 gathered nearly 1 million signatures, far more than the 890,000 required to get on the ballot. And those petitions have already been reviewed and certified by supervisors of elections across the state. And yet DeSantis released a report this week suggesting widespread fraud, even though the time to challenge these petitions has long since passed. In fact, What DeSantis is doing is unprecedented. We have never seen a governor launch a criminal investigation into a ballot measure, and he is doing it while people are voting. And that may well be the reason he's doing it, to throw mud on the amendment, hoping it will turn off just enough voters to keep the amendment from reaching that 60% threshold. But that's not everything DeSantis is doing. He has also been using taxpayer money to run ads through the State Department of Health attacking the amendment. And it's not just Amendment 4. He has also used taxpayer money to attack Amendment 3. Even State Senator Joe Gruters, the former chair of the Republican Party of Florida, accuses DeSantis of using taxpayer money to spread propaganda about the two amendments.
Well, I'll say the Governor DeSantis, I think he's doing a great job as governor, but no matter where I personally stand on issues, I don't think we should use public tax dollars on propaganda, and that's what I think this is. I think it sets a bad precedent for administrations moving forward, and we should never use, listen, we live in a democracy at the end of the day. We should never spend tax dollars on political ads.
So you do think this is propaganda?
I do.
And if that's not enough, the governor has gone so far as to send television stations across the state letters threatening criminal prosecution against stations that run certain ads in support of Amendment 4. Let me say that again. He has threatened to criminally prosecute television stations that run certain ads in support of Amendment 4. DeSantis' actions are so unprecedented, there's that word again, that the chair of the Federal Communications Commission issued a statement that said, "The right of broadcasters to speak freely is rooted in the First Amendment. Threats against broadcast stations for airing content that conflicts with the government's views are dangerous and undermine the fundamental principle of free speech." And late Thursday, a federal judge in Tallahassee issued a restraining order against DeSantis and the Department of Health, preventing them from taking any action against TV stations, saying it was a clear violation of the, quote, "the bedrock principle that the government cannot threaten third parties with legal sanctions to censor speech it disfavors." The judge went on to write, "To keep it simple for the state of Florida, it's the First Amendment, stupid." So what does this all mean? Well, it means that the power is still in your hands. And despite the best efforts of the governor, whether it's to use taxpayer money to spread propaganda, or use state police to question and possibly intimidate voters, or threaten TV stations with prosecution, the voters will ultimately decide Amendment 4. And now, all you have to do is go vote. If you support the amendment, vote for it. If you oppose it, vote against it. That's just that simple. Now, when we return, we will tell the story of one young woman forced to leave the state to get an abortion. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are examining Amendment 4, which would restore a woman's right to have an abortion up until viability, which most doctors agree is around 24 weeks, taking Florida back to where it was before Roe was overturned. Today in Florida, a woman cannot have an abortion after 6 weeks, when many women don't even realize they are pregnant. Here now is the story of one of those women.
A new abortion law goes into effect today in Florida, sharply restricting the procedure after 6 weeks.
Now, almost every state in the South has restrictions on the procedure. In most of those states, it is nearly outlawed.
I sat in the waiting room of a clinic in Florida and watched people being sorted into groups based on the difference of a few millimeters of growth on an embryo the size of a pea, right? Whether they were 6 weeks 1 day and they were too late, or whether they were 5 weeks 4 days and they could get an abortion still in the state of Florida.
This ban is not going to stop Florida's women from getting abortions. It just means that those who don't have the resources to travel out of state won't be able to get abortion.
You have to travel many, many miles all the way to North Carolina if you want access to an abortion.
Why are you doing this?
I just feel like I need to share my experience, the hurdles I went through to have to even get an abortion.
For this story, we'll call her Ellie. She is 22 years old, and since Florida's 6-week ban went into effect on May 1st, she is one of more than 1,000 women who have had to leave the state to receive an abortion. And like so many of those women, Ellie didn't even realize she was pregnant until it was too late to do anything about it under the new law.
I didn't have symptoms that I would think would be pregnancy. And I was like, let me take a test just to make sure. And I took it and it said pregnant. I was so scared, like really scared.
The next day, Ellie's mom drove her to an abortion clinic here in South Florida.
So I do want children in my future, but at the time, I just knew it wasn't the right time for me to have a child. Emotionally and financially, I could not take care of a child. I also just graduated college and didn't have a job yet.
Ellie and her mother both assumed she was early in her pregnancy and that the 6-week ban wouldn't be a factor. But inside the clinic, she was given various tests, including an ultrasound, to determine how far along she was in the pregnancy. A counselor took her to a private room and told her she was nearly 8 weeks pregnant. As they're explaining this to you, and you're realizing you're going to have to leave the state, what's going through your mind?
Well, first telling my mom that we had to do that. Just also financially, like paying for a plane ticket. And also I had already paid at this clinic, like the deposit, and having to pay again in Washington, D.C. And like the checkup after that. I could not afford that myself.
What do you think about that?
I think people are going to get pregnant anyways. Like, it's going to happen. People are going to have to have an abortion. They should not make it harder on the woman, especially since, like, the guys don't have to go through that. Only the woman does.
Her mother was waiting outside the clinic when she came out. Then you got to take that walk from the clinic to the car, get in the car with your mom, and tell her what's going through your mind at that point.
All the emotions. I was angry and like I was crying when I came up to her, and frustrated.
Why were you crying?
Just because I knew what I had to do and how long it would take to actually finally get the abortion.
We asked her mom to join us.
I saw her face and when she walked to the car, and I could tell. And she was crying. So I knew what was coming. My heart sank. Yeah, it was hard to know that she was going to have to go through this. And I'm sorry, it's very, it's hard. But I knew I had to get to work right away, and we bought the tickets right there in the car.
You went on your phone and actually bought the tickets in the car?
Yeah, yeah.
Bought the tickets.
Yep. And when I told my husband, I just broke down. Yeah. That was very, very sad for her. I just felt like somebody just reached and took my soul out, really. Because I knew it was going to be difficult for her.
Across Florida, abortion clinics are spending more and more time helping women leave the state for an abortion.
Now we're doing navigation services. We're having to figure out for these patients, where will they go next? Where can they get an appointment? How long will it take? How will they be able to afford it? So that's become 50% of the practice.
It's now helping people to actually leave Florida to get the care they need.
Yes.
Eileen Diamond is the director of BSSI, an abortion clinic in Broward County. Since the 6-week ban went into effect in May, the clinic has helped more than 260 women travel to New York or Virginia or even Puerto Rico to have an abortion.
All of them should have been able to have an abortion in our state. There's nothing different happening. It's not like they're not getting an abortion. They're still going to get it, but you're punishing the woman.
Since the 6-week ban went into effect, the number of abortions performed in Florida has dropped significantly. In April, the month before the ban went into effect, there were 9,730 abortions in Florida. In May, it dropped to 5,630, and in June, to 5,200. It is impossible to know exactly how many Florida women have been forced to travel to other states for an abortion, but a survey of clinics by CBS News Miami suggests the number since the beginning of May is likely several thousand. For Diamond, telling a woman she is not able to get the care she desires in Florida because of the 6-week ban is difficult.
The women are devastated. They're upset. They're angry. Some patients have become violent. They've slammed down their paperwork. They've yanked things off the wall. You can't account to how somebody's going to accept this news. Some people, you feel like they're melting in front of you. They just don't know where to turn. People who are choosing to have an abortion are doing it because they feel that they really need it.
Yvonne Schmergel has worked at the clinic for 15 years and is often the person who must first tell the woman she is beyond the 6 weeks.
In one afternoon, I had to speak to 5 women and tell them, I'm sorry, we're unable to help you in the state of Florida. Some of them are very upset emotionally because they're going through their head, I can't believe I have to go out of state. And they have hardships. And they say, how am I going to afford this? What am I going to do? And every time that happens, I go through those same emotions myself.
It's a race. It's like if you're constantly in a race to try to beat that date. And when you have to sit down and tell somebody, listen, you're over by a day, you're over by a week, you're over by 2 weeks, we're still talking about a pregnancy that is very early and very small. And often they have just detected it themselves.
I think there's a lot of people who don't understand how the 6-week is defined.
Nope. When you look at the date of the last menstrual period, 2 weeks later when you have conception, those are kind of lost weeks, but they're part of the way that you figure out the dating on a pregnancy. So at 6 weeks, it means that they've only gotten pregnant 4 weeks before. And anything past that, 6 weeks, 1 day is too far along. So yes, you're telling them, yes, we know that you conceived on this date, but we have to add these other 2 weeks.
Let's go through that again. A woman may know the exact date she conceived, let's say August 15th. When she eventually discovers she is pregnant, she may think she has 6 weeks from that day or until September 26th to end her pregnancy. But in reality, the 6-week clock actually started on August 1st, which was the first day of her last period, which means instead of September 26th, the 6-week clock is up on September 12th.
It's a terrible moment. We try to give them time to adjust to that and let them think over their decision. Most of the time they say, you know why I'm here? I'm here because I went through the hard work already. I've already had that conversation with myself, and in my heart, this is the best thing for myself, for my family.
Ellie and her mom were both in disbelief as they boarded the flight in early September from South Florida to Washington, D.C.
I just felt so wrong the whole time. Like, it's so crazy that I have to even, flee the state to do this.
When they arrived at the D.C. clinic, they say the waiting room was packed, and every woman there had their own story about why they made the choice to end their pregnancy. Can you imagine going through what you went through by yourself?
No, not at all. It's not even a thought in my head that I would have gone through that by myself. I just could not have done that.
And yet so many women in Florida are now having to do that.
I think it's just crazy. I think they deserve to be in a place where they're comfortable to go through something so personal, and it's their own health, no one else's.
Your family is fortunate because you were able to come together as a family and support each other. You can also imagine a lot of women not having that support, and imagine what this is like for them.
That was my constant thought, was how is this fair to women? How many girls have just walked into this clinic and don't have these options, don't have her parents, even younger than my daughter is. That's all I could think about, was how unfair this was. The situation that we were put in was that 6-week abortion ban, how unfair it was.
While they were in Washington, D.C., Ellie's mom learned that Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton filed a lawsuit seeking the medical records of Texas women who have left the state for an abortion. Florida has not followed suit, but it worries both Ellie and her mother, which is one of the reasons why they asked for their identities to be hidden.
we don't know how far this is going to, how far they're going to take it. I mean, they got rid of Roe versus Wade, and some states don't have any exception for abortion. So it's scary. It's quite scary, and we are, her father and I are very concerned about her safety because she decided to get health care. I hate saying the word abortion because it really gives it a negative connotation when it shouldn't. It is health care, and it's if you don't have that health care, women are going to be thrown back to the time where we had no choices.
You've never told this story before.
No.
Introduce yourself.
I'm Elaine Bloom, a little old lady on Miami Beach.
Elaine Bloom is more than just a little old lady on Miami Beach. She was one of the first women ever elected to the Florida House of Representatives.
I first started in 1974 when only 12 women, I believe, had ever been elected to the Florida House of Representatives prior to that year. So it was a tough road for women to come into the Florida legislature, but I'm very glad that I was able to do it.
The 87-year-old Bloom is not here, however, to reminisce about her years in Tallahassee. The story she's come to tell is a far more personal one, a story she has never fully told before.
I was going to go in July of 1971 for the founding meeting of the National Women's Political Caucus, and I had a ticket, and instead I had to fly to New York to get an abortion because I was already bleeding with an early pregnancy.
In 1971, 2 years before the Supreme Court decision in Roe, a doctor would go to prison for performing an abortion in Florida.
This was not a planned pregnancy, but I suddenly had a lot of bleeding, and it was confirmed by the doctor that this is what was happening, but that it was not going the right way. The doctor felt that I should not continue this pregnancy, so he recommended that I go to New York.
What you did in 1971, having to go to New York, in essence, you're what is now being referred to as a medical refugee. You had to leave your state to go to another state to get the health care you needed.
That is correct, yes. When I had to go to New York to receive the care, the medical care that I needed, but couldn't get here in Florida, I was a medical refugee.
Bloom said in many ways she was very lucky. Her husband could travel with her to New York, and she had family in Miami who could watch her 2 young children.
When we went to New York in 1971, July 11th, 1971, for that procedure, I remember the tremendous feeling of gratitude that I was in a position to be able to do this. I had some other serious medical conditions to deal with in years prior to that, and I didn't want to hurt my body in any way. I wanted to be able to be a strong, healthy mother to my children.
Bloom also recalls what happened during another pregnancy.
In 1962, I had a 5th-month miscarriage. I was told when I went for a regular checkup that the pregnancy was no longer viable and go home. It'll happen in a few days by itself, and bring the products of conception with you and meet me in the hospital so I can do what is necessary to clean out the procedure.
So rather than, in 1962, rather than deal with it at the time as they should have, they just sent you home.
Yes, and this was really terrible to do that to somebody, knowing that it's going to happen. And what do you do? How do you handle it? And I had to do it in my own bed.
"60 years later, women across the country say they are facing the same horrors. A recent Associated Press investigation found scores of women turned away from hospitals afraid of helping them because of abortion restrictions in their state, including a woman in Florida who ended up having a miscarriage in a public restroom. In an interview last year, State Senator Lauren Book described another woman
The woman was 18 weeks pregnant when her water broke and the pregnancy was no longer viable. She could not have an abortion. She needed to wait because there was no imminent risk to her health to go home and develop sepsis before they would take the pregnancy. What world do we live in that we are telling women to go home and develop sepsis? What kind of third world care as the government stepped in and told women what they can and cannot do with their bodies and put them in harm's way to receive health care that they deserve?
What you're describing, what you went through in 1962 and then again in 1971, is what women are dealing with now.
Right this minute, women are dealing with it.
When the Supreme Court finally did adopt Roe and accept Roe and made abortion legal in the United States, did you think what you had went through was in the past and would never be dealt with again?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I believe that the women of this country never expected this to come back to haunt them again.
I know exactly where I was the day like Roe v. Wade was overturned, and I just never thought it would happen to me.
When it was overturned, what did you think?
I was scared for everyone in Florida, especially like all my friends. We always are open about like scares and stuff, so I was always so scared that they would have to go through that.
And then it turned out to be you.
Yeah.
For Ellie and her mother, the flight back to Florida from D.C. was a quiet one. What was the plane ride home like?
I think it was relief.
Yeah, relief.
It was relief. It was knowing that she could get back to her life.
Feel like myself again, because I was not feeling like myself before that.
I think it made her grow up, obviously, and mature. And I think it lit a fire in her that I don't think she knew she had. I mean, just the fact that we're sitting here right now, that she wanted to do this, and put her voice out there, I just think there was no way that my daughter of, 3 months ago would have even thought about going on TV and having this conversation. There's no way.
And you can hear that newfound fire in Ellie's words.
I think that they're just trying to control women in general. I don't really think it's about the baby or the fetus. I think it's just to control women.
When we come back, we will be joined by Dr. Rosie Christie, who opposes Amendment 4. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are exploring the issues surrounding Amendment 4, and joining me now to speak out against the amendment is Dr. Rosie Christie, a radiologist and senior fellow for the Catholic Association. Dr. Christie, thank you for coming in.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
I want to start by, I asked you to join us in the studio so that you could see the short film that we just did about that young woman. What would you respond? What would you say to that young woman who feels as if she's being punished because she has to leave the state because she didn't even realize she was pregnant until she was 8 weeks along?
I'm really glad that I came in a little early and I watched that whole package, and it was very affecting and very moving. But what moved me the most was this terrible, everybody, the mother, the daughter, you were so sad that she had to travel. What was really sad is that she accepts as her lot that she's going to be having abortions because the way that our society is set up, she's going to be picking up the pieces and she's going to be having abortions. And everybody was so sad about traveling to DC, but the actual terrible sadness is that girls are going through this at all, that they're having abortions. And it sounded like she learned a lot in the procedure. She didn't seem to learn that this is not the kind of lifestyle that is conducive to health and happiness, a lifestyle of having to have abortions periodically.
Well, I don't know that she wants to have abortions on a regular basis. I think this was an incident in which she didn't realize she became pregnant and that. But would you say that she should have then carried the child to term?
That's what made me sad watching this, because the focus seemed all on this flight to Washington, right? Which, yeah, it complicates matters. This is what I would say. I'm glad that you showed this because it shows how deeply democratic Amendment 4 is. If people feel that 6 weeks is too short for a mother to decide to abort her child, it's too short a period, she needs longer, then that's something that we can work on, that the people of Florida, voters in Florida, can work on through the legislative process. And they can say, well, maybe 10 weeks is better, or 8 weeks, or 9 weeks. But Amendment 4 puts everything away from the voter and makes elective abortion legal through all 40 weeks of pregnancy. And let me say, you were very illustrative when you showed the calendar. And it's true. A woman who is 6 weeks pregnant conceived 3 weeks earlier. Okay? No, actually, I'm sorry, 4 weeks. 4 weeks earlier. And pregnancy tests today are extremely, extremely sensitive. A woman can know she's pregnant 3 weeks into that period. Right?
If she thinks of it, again, this young woman did not believe that she was. She actually thought she had had a period. She had bleeding and spotting, and so. But again,
let me give you my suggestion. We live in a state right now where elective abortion is legal for any reason through the first 6 weeks of pregnancy. If a young woman, if a girl, if a woman is sure that she does not want to give birth to her child, that she wants to abort her child, or that she feels pretty strongly that that is something she would consider, I would suggest have a pregnancy test quite often. If you are sexually active and you think you could get pregnant, then have a pregnancy test if you are sure you don't want to travel to DC, because they cost 97 cents at Walmart, and you have 3 weeks.
So your idea is just women should just every month just take a pregnancy test.
They can take one every week for 97 cents, for instance, if they don't want to travel to DC.
So let's go back to Amendment 4. So you said something before about how this would, and I've heard you talk before about how this would allow pregnancy or abortions through what was it?
The entire pregnancy.
Yeah, that's not true.
It is true.
No, it's really not.
It is really true.
Yeah.
It's true, sir.
Tell me why you believe so.
It's not why I believe, it is true, because the law as it states itself, the amendment says, no law shall be passed in Florida that will restrict, delay, or prohibit abortion through viability or thereafter for the mother's health. Because of the way it's phrased, no law is allowed in Florida after viability, which is 23 or 24 weeks, if it interferes with the mother's health, but the mother's health is not defined. The mother's health has been proven by Supreme Court cases in the United States to mean not just physical health, but her emotional health, her social health, her economic health, and that is how it would be interpreted. So Florida would become a mecca.
By the way, who would interpret that? When you say it would be interpreted, and by the way, the actual amendment says no law shall prohibit, penalize, delay, or restrict abortion before viability or when necessary to protect the patient's health, as determined by the patient's healthcare provider.
Right. The healthcare provider is not a doctor necessarily. It's undefined. The mother's health is undefined, and it has been proven in prior cases and under Roe v. Wade, for instance, that mother's health is not her physical health, just her physical health.
So, but when you say, but again, you go back to the idea of like who will be deciding this? As I understand it, these are questions that may very well get raised, but will be decided by the Florida Supreme Court, because it will be up to the Florida Supreme Court to interpret the constitutional amendment. This is a very conservative court. Do you honestly believe that the Florida Supreme Court is going to allow abortion up through the 7th, 8th, or 9th month?
The Supreme Court can only do what's constitutional, correct? If you put an amendment on the Constitution and the amendment says that no law can stand, then no law can stand. That's what it means. It's a self-executing amendment. It's a self-executing law.
There is nobody on the side of who is supporting this that has claimed that this is going to be, they say up until viability. It's no different than what it was up under Roe.
Of course they're denying this. They're lying. I got a notice, say yes on, I got a flyer to my house delivered yesterday, say yes on 4. And on the other side it said that in Florida there are no exceptions for rape or incest or health of the mother. That is a patent lie. The people who are supporting this amendment are lying right and left like rugs.
So you talk also about parental consent and the issue of parental notification. And this was an so explain to me your concern as it relates to that in the amendment.
Right now in Florida, for a minor girl, say a 12-year-old girl who's being abused or trafficked, for her to have an abortion, her parents have to be present, or her mother or her father, or she has to have a notarized letter. It's the same thing that we have in Florida for body piercing and for tattoos. Why? Because a child, a minor girl, ought to have her parents involved or her guardians.
And that's going to be the case case after this amendment passes.
But it's not.
But it is.
But it's not.
So why do you believe it's not?
Because the amendment preserves parental notification.
Mm-hmm.
Parental notification is not the same thing as consent.
Do you know why it says?
I do know why.
Because I looked at this.
I know exactly why.
You know what? So the reason why it says parental notification, and I had to understand this. You're not an attorney.
Complicated.
Well,
it's very complicated.
It's actually not as complicated. Mm-hmm. You say parental notification because this was an amendment that was drafted, and there is already parental notification in the Florida Constitution. So in the Florida Constitution, it already describes parental notification. By putting the ballot language this way, which says the amendment does not change the legislature's constitutional authority to require notification to a parent or guardian before a minor has an abortion, what they're making clear is that this amendment of the Constitution will not change anything in the other amendment inside the Constitution. It lets parental consent laws remain in effect.
No,
it does.
It does not. You're wrong. You're wrong, and I'll tell you why. Parental notification is not the same as consent.
You're absolutely right. It's different. But there is you cannot have two issues in the constitutional amendment at the same time. You couldn't have an amendment that says parental consent as well as the abortion issue, because that's a separate issue. And it's already in statute. The legislature will enact this. They are allowed to have parental consent, and that will remain.
The first part of the amendment nullifies the consent, not the notification. And I'll tell you exactly why. For a child to come to the Planned Parenthood, these women that you show being so kind and beautiful on in your package, for a child to come to Planned Parenthood and to require consent from her parents is a delay and is a restriction on abortion. What's going to happen, I can assure you, is that these kind women at Planned Parenthood are going to have her fill out a postcard, and they're going to mail a postcard or send an email to her parents after the fact, or to whatever she fills out. So it is unconscionable that in the state of Florida,
you're making that, but there is no. Where are you getting that from? How
the
are you?
The amendment is very specifically written to be vague, so that all of these things are able to be done later after the amendment.
Let's take a quick commercial, then we'll come back and continue to talk. All right, we'll continue our conversation after the break. Welcome back. We are joined again by Dr. Christie, who opposes Amendment 4. We've been having a spirited discussion. I want to sort of take a step back, because I think this goes to the larger issue of, I know that you come at this from also an issue of faith. You believe life begins at conception.
I do, but this is not an issue of faith for me. This is about women and girls in Florida and the kind of care that they deserve. And having unregulated abortion in Florida is a disaster for Floridian girls and women, not to mention the babies, but
you argue
the
that
women and the girls.
You argue that the problem with the amendment, I've heard you talk about how nothing is defined.
Right.
In fact, everything is defined, not in the amendment, but in statute. Viability is defined. Florida statute, I can say, Florida's Title 29, Chapter 390 of the Florida statute defines viability means the stage of fetal development when life of a fetus is sustainable outside the womb through standard medical measures. That will not be altered by this amendment. When the Supreme Court decides how to view this amendment, they will go to the state statute that defines viability, and that's the standard that they'll use.
Does it say what week? Does it say what week is viability?
At the stage of development when life of a fetus is sustainable outside the womb through standard medical measures.
Right, it's not defined as a week.
Because science changes.
Right, science changes.
Isn't that a wonderful thing? There may come a point where where a fetus is able to be sustained outside the womb at 20 weeks or at 18 weeks.
According to the amendment, the viability line means nothing, because the next phrase of the sentence says, or after viability, if necessary for the mother's health, according to her health provider. The mother's health is not defined. It can mean her social, emotional, and economic health.
Well, this is an interesting thing that I hear.
This is how you get to elective abortion for 40 weeks.
But
which is the mecca that Planned Parenthood and other big abortion want in Florida. Do you think that people who come to Florida to perform abortions, second and third trimester abortions, which are brutal, in which the baby can feel
rare,
pain, they're not rare enough? And they're elective. Did you know the vast majority of late-term abortions are elective? According to Guttmacher, not according to me.
So let me ask you this. Do you think that a woman just wakes up one day, 7 months into her pregnancy, 8 months into her pregnancy, and says, the hell with it. I'm going to go down and get me an abortion.
You know, you say that in a very dark way, but according to Guttmacher, which is the abortion industry's statistics and public policy guru, according to Guttmacher, the reason women get late-term abortions is exactly the same reason they get early abortions. For the father's not around, I have economic problems, I am not ready to have a baby. And
that's a really dark view of women.
Look it up on Guttmacher. So I didn't say it. No. And let me finish saying another thing. The reason that they give the most is I didn't get around to it. And if you make elective abortion legal in Florida in the second and third trimester, which is what this amendment would do, then girls and women, instead of having an abortion in the first 6 weeks when it's safer for them and not so traumatic and brutal, they'll be having them in the second and third trimester.
The legislature will define the enacting legislation, and the state Supreme Court, which is very conservative, all DeSantis appointees will decide it. I want to play for you a piece of sound that you gave. You spoke at the March for Life in 2015. I want to play that's what you said then, and let's talk about it afterwards.
Children are choices, commodities, and those that are deemed defective are being eradicated before birth. When I examine a baby in utero and I suspect Down syndrome, my heart breaks because 9 times out of 10, this is a death sentence. The mother and father will never know the delight that God prepared for them when He created their son or their daughter. Instead, the life of a baby that is typically well over 20 weeks old will end in violence and pain.
You talk about how this in 2015, this was before Roe was overturned, how a terrible situation we are because, as you said, children are choices and commodities. And you talk about how it breaks your heart when you see that.
Because they're my patients.
Do you imagine, but I would imagine what you feel compares to nothing to what those parents feel when you give them the news that the child has Down syndrome. Do you think that's an easy decision for them to decide to terminate that pregnancy?
It's not an easy decision, but I'll tell you something else.
But do you want to make it for them?
To be disabled, first of all, you can abort in Florida till 15 weeks for fetal disability, right now legally, okay? Another thing is, it is unconscionable in our society that to be disabled is a death sentence. And that's what happens with this idea that you test all the babies before they're born.
But you want to make the decision for the parents.
I'm not making the decision for anybody. I'm standing up for patients, for my little patients, some of whom have defects and are deformed, and are disabled. I have seen parents abort a baby for a cleft lip. I have seen parents abort because it's the wrong sex, because they wanted a girl and not a boy. I wish these things weren't true. I wish people love their children from the very beginning, and sometimes they don't, and I'm very sad for that. But Amendment 4 is wrong because Amendment 4 allows elective abortion through birth in Florida.
Through birth?
Through birth.
Yeah, okay. Dr. Chrissy, I appreciate your coming in. I really do appreciate your time, and thank you very much.
It was a real pleasure to talk to you.
All right, take care. We'll be right back after the break. If you have any thoughts or comments about today's show, feel free to contact me at jdefede@cbs.com. I honestly enjoy hearing from you. Well, we will be live for the next 2 Sundays as we count down to what may be one of the most consequential elections in this country's history. Thanks again for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.